I already started recording, Gary.
Yeah. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Heart with Gary Rhinehart. My name is Gary Rhinehart, and this show is brought to you by Mountain Market, best place to get gas and food. I am here with Patrick Crouse, the coordinator to the HFM Prevention Council. How you doing today, Pat?
Very good, Gary. Thanks for having me again. It's been a little while, but
Yeah,
looking forward to our conversation.
yeah. Those who are, um, big Heart Gary Reinhardt fans know that we've talked about a couple of things, including the subject we are going to be discussing tonight. We've talked about marijuana as a drug itself, but when we talked about it last, it wasn't legal. It was still going through state legislation at that point. And that
Right.
was almost about a year ago. So, so now it's become, I guess, I mean, that's a good first question. I mean, it's either criminalized or legal. Is that kind of interchangeable, or does that?
Um, well, yeah, New York State legalized adult use 21 or over marijuana, which it's now calling cannabis, last spring, so a little over a year ago. The legislation is called the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, passed by the New York State Legislature, signed by Governor Cuomo, and went into effect. So marijuana, which is still illegal at the federal level, is now legal in New York State, as it is in 19 other states, for adults 21 over. The best way to look at it, I think, is that it's now comparable to alcohol, tobacco. It's regulated by the state. It will be taxed, and it will be available to adults 21 or over in retail establishments or dispensaries very soon.
Is there a max amount that you can carry on your person?
I believe for adults now, the maximum amount is 3 ounces. And so, which is a significant amount. However, you can have quite a bit more at home. I believe it's actually 5 pounds. That's a real lot. One of the reasons for that is that soon you will be able to grow your own at home in New York State. Not yet. There's, according to the law, homegrown will not be allowed for a certain number of months after the first dispensaries go into business. However, regulations have come out allowing homegrown for medical marijuana use, which is different. And that's one of the reasons I think that you have a 5 pound limit for a household quantity.
Well, those who have lived in Hamilton County know that we had just had, either through referendum or through your local municipality, votes on where dispensaries can be. I know Speculator, Wells, Lake Pleasant, Piseco, Arietta, I guess, have said no to dispensaries in their area, where Long Lake, Indian Lake, and oddly enough, Hope, by just by virtue of not getting a vote in on time.
Right.
So that gives 3 areas which are, and then 4 that are not.
Right. Yeah, the legislation had interesting provision, kind of a nod to home rule, where municipalities could opt out by the end of 2021. That could be decided by the appropriate, governing body of the town or village or city. That could be overruled if a citizens referendum was held. If enough votes were or enough signatures were gathered and a referendum was held, that gave the population the chance to actually overturn that. So all across New York State, it was a patchwork. Probably about 30% of towns, villages, or cities did take the option of opting out. That means that there will be no retail stores in their boundaries. Also, there was a second option too, which was to opt out of basically social consumption clubs, a club where you can that would be privately owned, where you could consume cannabis. So that was a second option. You could opt out of retail, but opt into consumption clubs. So quite a few towns did opt out in New York State. They do have the option to opt back in. So if they look at their neighbors and say, well, they're getting some tax revenue from this, I think we'll change our minds and get on board. So that's an option. However, if you did not opt out, then that's it. That was the deadline, was the end of December last year. So that was only for those two categories. There's those two licenses: licensed retail, licensed consumption clubs. However, there's a long list of other licensed cannabis businesses that localities didn't have that choice. Includes agriculture, production, wholesale distribution, delivery, co-ops. There's a whole list of other licenses that are included in the legislation that you couldn't opt out of. So someone could apply to New York State and open up a manufacturing site in your town, making, say, edibles containing cannabis containing THC, and you really wouldn't have much way to stop it other than your local zoning.
So that kind of answers that. Even if you said no to the dispensary and or no to the consumption club, farming and production are separate from that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and New York State tried to, they're trying to avoid like vertical integration where you have one company own from top to bottom. They've done that. That's true in alcohol and liquor a lot. But yeah, so there's like 9 licenses that you can obtain to get in on this new industry. Everything from, as I mentioned, most of them, but if you think about it, it's a crop. So everything from agriculture through production, manufacturing, distribution, and some other still kind of undefined licenses, including co-ops and a couple others.
Yeah. Now here's the thing: if marijuana is still illegal on the federal level, how does the state law override that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as I said, there's 19 states. It began with really with Colorado, which passed through a referendum. And it's gone back and forth. It's still illegal under the Controlled Substances Act. It's Schedule 1, so it's in the same category as heroin, LSD, and a number of other quote unquote hard drugs. There are numerous bills in Washington to legalize cannabis in various ways or to decriminalize it. Some are just more like states' rights acts that will just basically the federal government has just decided to not interfere in this process in the states. That's the short answer. They're still enforcing trafficking, trafficking into the country from Mexico and elsewhere, which has gone down a lot, of course, since legalization has spread. But they basically have just taken a hands-off approach.
Do residents in New York have any fear to be prosecuted on a federal level?
Well, that's a good question. Also, it's a real complex issue. For instance, if you apply for, say, a handgun and go through that whole process, you have to fill out forms saying that you don't use illegal drugs. Whether that will actually be looked into, enforced. There's still a lot of prohibition against, as far as people in sensitive occupations, as far as say you're a pilot, okay, you can't use it all. So there's still some occupations where you where it's prohibited, and that is being enforced and tested. But that's changing all the time. New York State has basically said to employers that you can't test for marijuana anymore, except for a few jobs. So it's up to the business, say, to deal with it on an impairment level. This person uses on their own time recreationally, as long as it's not affecting their work or they don't come to work impaired. There's really nothing that they can do about it. Of course, there's some exceptions too. If you receive federal money too, institutions can get into trouble. For instance, colleges and some businesses, but it's unclear how that will all work out at this point. It's, as far as the federal government, it doesn't look like it will be legalized at the federal level anytime soon, but more likely you'll see kind of a piecemeal approach. For instance, because it's illegal at the federal level, you can't really use the banking system. So that's one huge problem with marijuana legalization, is that dispensaries have to deal in cash for the most part. There's a pretty strong move in Washington to change that, the SAFE Act and other approaches, which will allow businesses to access the banking, finance, and the rest. But so yeah, it's kind of a contradictory and complex situation right now.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way.
But as I've said, there are numerous bills in Washington by a number of people from both parties that seek to either remove it from Schedule 1 and put it into another schedule, Schedule 3 or 4, or to legalize it entirely, or to decriminalize it, or to just allow the states to, officially through legislation, do what they want to do.
Yeah. Now, how do you test for things like that? Because I know, like you had mentioned, pistol permits, CDLs being the driver's licenses for big trucks are on a federal level.
Yeah.
So if you have a CDL, much like if you got caught being, having alcohol on you while you're using your CDL, it's just the same. You can't be caught with I guess you'd say marijuana in your system, or but with
I would like the federal state conflict. The subject of testing is even more complex, maybe. Not only for just detecting use, but also for impairment as far as driving or use. The main psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, THC, is very different from alcohol. It stays in your system. It's fat soluble, so you can use 3-4 weeks ago, and it will still show up in a blood test. So that's why, for say, if you have a CDL or something, it's really a zero tolerance law, because it will show up. There have been people fired recently, and it's gone into the courts, who have tested positive for THC and said that they had never used anything. What they had used was a CBD product that's cannabidiol, which is another ingredient of cannabis that's non-psychoactive and that's used for various medical reasons. But often CBD products will have trace amounts of THC in them. So that will show up. So there was a recent case where a woman lost her job, and the courts upheld her termination, even though she had never smoked or used it. She had only used a CBD product. So yeah, it's very easy to find the presence of it, but testing for impairment is extremely hard, because the link between, say, if you're driving a car, it is illegal now to drive under the influence of cannabis, just like alcohol, but there aren't really any established limits like the blood alcohol content with alcohol. in New York State. It's going to be very difficult because it's difficult to prove a link between how much you've consumed and what, say, your blood level is. If you do take a blood test, impairment, which is only going to be really approved by a roadside test of some kind. Some of the newest research has shown that you can have consumed a very small amount and still fail a roadside test and impairment test for different tests, or you can have blood or other fluids drawn and have a high amount of THC in your system and still not be impaired. So it's a huge problem that's been unleashed with legalization that really is not even close to being resolved yet.
Yeah, and the problem with like you said, those types of road tests, and I like kind of eyeballing it, is you don't have like that definitive number. Like if I blow a 0.09 or 0.1,
Mhm.
you have a definitive number to say, hey, you're drunk, you are over the limit, this is the limit we've gone, this is it. But when you try to eyeball something and have someone say, well, I think he's impaired, lawyers will jump all over that and be like, well, what makes your decision to think he was impaired?
Mhm.
It's not quantifiable, I guess.
Yeah, there's companies that are trying to develop the equivalent of a cannabis breathalyzer. There are other tests that, saliva tests that can show that you've used recently. What's really needed is a more complex form of a sobriety test, and they exist for cannabis and for other drugs. And that's what's really needed. And to do that, you really need special training. That's why the legislation in New York State has said that they will, from the tax revenue, will fund more training of law enforcement of what are called drug recognition experts. So they're specially trained state police or sheriffs who are trained to do the appropriate tests to prove that you're impaired from using cannabis. And there will be a real need for that because probably use will increase, and as it's normalized, also driving under the influence will increase. But you're right, for a good defense lawyer right now, from what is known about the link between impairment and consumption, you're going to be in a good position to get your client off. It's going to be very hard to prove impairment until some magic test comes along. But even then, it's complex. It varies from individual to individual. The science for alcohol for BAC is established, and you really can't challenge that in court anymore. It's very different for cannabis because it's just for THC, it's just a different chemical.
Yeah. Now I know when New York made cannabis legal in a medical form, it was only allowed, if I remember correctly, in a pill or a vaporizer of some sort. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's one of the first regulations. So like alcohol, there's now a new regulatory agency, the Office of Cannabis Management, that's very busy putting out new regulations. Because the law exists, but there's a lot of things that have yet to be in regulatory form yet. One of the first things they did do was allow people who have a medical marijuana card from a doctor. Now, remember, it can't be called a prescription because it's still illegal under federal law. So doctors will provide you with a card with a recommendation to use a cannabis product, which you get from a dispensary. But now you can get it in smokable form, or what's sometimes called flower. That's new. And
Yeah.
you will also be able to grow up to six plants, I believe, per individual. So that's three mature and 3 immature plants in your backyard, or for a household up to 12 plants. Now that's a lot. They have to be secured, out of sight. There's a lot of regulations, but that's kind of a regulatory definition that really was written by, I think, the industry, and as you see it in other states. But that's quite a lot, and that's already that went through the first public period of, I don't believe that's actually been finally adopted as a regulation, but it will be soon. And that's for, again, that's for people who have a medical marijuana card, which you can get from, and then one of the biggest changes that was made in New York State is a lot of other states, the list of conditions that you can receive a medical marijuana card is actually pretty small. In New York State now, it's not only a doctor. They've expanded the list of people who can recommend and provide you with a card, and that even includes physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, and the like. And you now can really get it for anything. The doctor can, if you go, I need this for this condition, I really think it will help me, and if they agree. So it used to be a pretty small list of conditions that you can use medical marijuana. Now it's available for just about anything. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that will expand, of course, production and sales and profits for those companies.
Yeah, I want to get back to production because, like I was saying, with at least in the original medical marijuana law, you only had like the two types, but now you'll be able to do other items. But what other items will dispensaries allow? We kind of talked a little bit about edibles,
Right.
and things of that nature.
Yeah. I'll back up quickly because you mentioned about agriculture. As I said, there's the Office of Cannabis Management has been very busy. They're really trying to move fast. There was talk that it's been over a year since it's been legal in New York State. So that's one thing it's done, is created this belief in the public, since it's legal, that I can now have a food truck or a marijuana truck and sell it. And there's been a lot of that around the state, and they've started to crack down. All illegal. People think now that they just won't be prosecuted. Well, there's been not a lot of prosecution of it. The OCM has issued letters to businesses telling them to cease and desist, and saying if they ever want to get an actual dispensary license, they better stop it. They'll never get one. But as I said, they've been moving really fast, trying to get retail shops open by the end of the year. So one of the things, of course, to have that happen, you've got to grow the stuff. They've already issued about 160 licenses. Think of that, New York State. There's 160 farms, small businesses, new people to the company that now have agricultural licenses. So that's a lot. That happened really quickly. New York State really did the legislation here is pretty unique. And I should talk about that a little bit really quickly. They've really put a priority on what they call social equity, meaning that majority of the licenses, 50% of the dispensary licenses, and a lot of the agricultural licenses and the other licenses too, will go to people that they believe were harmed by previous marijuana prosecutions. So that they don't mention race, specifically. They talk about neighborhoods and areas and zip codes, but it basically is a really huge program to get people that have been prosecuted. In fact, New York State is making a priority to grant financial help and help with business support to people who have actually been prosecuted and convicted. So if you've been convicted in the past of a marijuana related offense and have a record, you now are actually being put to the front of the line. The only requirement is that you have to have some experience running a business. So that is actually pretty controversial and is not very not supported very much by the public. Public opinion polls show New York residents not very favorable to making people who have actually been prosecuted and have a record put right to the front on this. So New York State's moving fast, and as I said, the legislation is at least in writing, in black and white, and in theory, is trying to grant a large number of licenses to people of color, minorities, veterans who are disabled, other groups of people that they would consider to meet their standards of social equity.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to think about because I don't. I'm not that I'm a lawyer of any sort. And I hope my listeners know that, but it's not very often you have laws that can retroact what you did before the law was introduced.
Right. Yeah. Well, most states that have legalized marijuana have also done a lot to expunge licenses of people who have been convicted. I don't know how many in New York State, but it's thousands of people who've been convicted of except some of the highest levels of trafficking have now have their records expunged, and which is it's good in a lot of ways because a lot of people who have say been arrested and convicted for, say, just possession, have a record, and that can affect your life in a lot of ways. It can affect you getting financial aid, public housing, job training, a lot of ways. So a lot of that is really good. It could have been accomplished through decriminalization as not part of a huge commercialization scheme, but it is part of what has happened here in New York State and in other states.
Now, with the Office of Cannabis Management, they are also going to be in control, most likely in control of the quality, or at least, I would think like the amount, or I guess it'd be more potency. Like if I
Okay.
had a flower, it would be this one's this potent and this one's this potent.
Yeah, well, that's one of the main things I think when we talk about today's marijuana, and we really have skipped over that. We talked about a lot in one of our previous interviews,
Mhm.
is that the potency, the level of THC in today's cannabis products. Now that includes flower that you smoke in a joint. It includes extracts, that includes edibles, includes oils that you might inhale through a vape device, an e-cigarette style device. All of those things, those concentrates, extracts, are all very clearly legal in New York State. A lot of activists, a lot of people of us who work in prevention have really worked to try and put limits on potency. In its natural state, cannabis, marijuana's THC content is maybe like 1 to 3%, very, very low. And it's been bred slowly over the years. And now it's typically, if you go to Colorado, say, very typical for flower for marijuana that you buy loose to be 20 to 30% THC. Extracts can be in the neighborhood of 50%. Some forms of concentrates that are more crystalline form can be up to 99% THC. So this is a real serious concern as far as not only for adults, the high potency of today's product, and a lot is really not known about the health effects of that. For youth, it's a huge concern because there's a lot of evidence linking today's high potency product to serious mental health issues, including onset of psychotic episodes, development of schizophrenia, and accompanying that, increased suicidality and incidence of suicide, accidents, all the rest. So it's a huge concern. It's not looking hopeful that the New York State will put limits on potency at this point. They just issued a bunch of regulations, though, for retail shops, and some of them are good. They include warning signs, limits clearly labeled, kind of like if you buy a pack of cigarettes, a similar kind of warning sign on it about some of the dangers. Clearly trying to have on any kind of product, especially on edibles, how much THC is in the total product. Say if you buy a candy bar, how much is in a single serving, what that serving is. So they're trying to make the packaging not at all attractive to kids. In the past, there's been a lot of, in early days of Colorado, a lot of products, made to look like candies, stealing brand names. They're clearly marketed towards young to kids, really, not just young people, 18 to 25, but to kids under 18. So OCM is trying to make the products safer, I guess. Less hard to open with clear warning signs, urging people, that they be stored safely, to be kept away from kids and all the rest.
Yeah, I know I'm gonna date myself here for my younger audience listeners, but of course, when I was a kid, the big um, the big controversy was always Joe Camel. You remember
Right.
Joe Camel?
Yeah.
Marlboro Man, you know, and those types of things, and those they were told you had to get rid of those because, I mean, look, I mean, I'm 34 and I still remember Joe Camel, and I
Sure.
remember the Marlboro
Yeah.
Man.
Well, this is a new big industry. Big marijuana has in a lot of ways has taken the playbook from big tobacco and tried to do the exact same things, at least so far, and that includes marketing to kids. I mean, in the early days, in some states, it was terrible. They would, uh, say like gummy bears. There's a good example. Okay, you go to a dispensary and you can buy gummy bears that are laced with THC. The amount of THC can vary incredibly from one gummy bear to the next, and they look exactly like a gummy bear you would buy in your local corner store that has no THC in it. So hopefully, and it looks like in New York State, they're really trying to control that and not let that happen.
Yeah. Now, I know this was kind of mentioned when for those who are listening, and you definitely should listen to our interview about marijuana, the product, like more in depth of the actual plant itself. Um, we kind of discussed back then how, at least when I was a kid, and maybe when you were younger, not saying that you're not young, Pat, you definitely a young person in heart. But they had, yeah, I know. They have things like the DARE program,
Right.
you know, which I mean, I remember as a kid, not not really speaking to me, I guess. It's very tough. It was very tough then, and now I think with marijuana it's even tougher because not only are you battling the companies, like you said, like the tobacco industry, but marijuana is unique in the fact that it's something that has been glorified in mainstream culture. Um, I mean, just as a 90s kid, I think about rappers like Snoop Dogg, big
Hmm.
proponent, Dr. Dre, even our country stars, Willie Nelson, huge advocate for marijuana.
Right.
You know, uh,
Yeah.
Seth Rogen is a big Hollywood star and a big proponent of marijuana. So it's
Right.
and it's been think of how many movies have had marijuana as like the centralized speaking of central, like Pineapple Express and the things that movies like that. um so what are organizations like yours trying to do to help try to break through that to the kids and try to explain to kids like, look, this is definitely
Yeah.
not something you should be doing at your age.
Right. Well, that's really gets down to, for me as someone who works in prevention, um, that's really gets down to the nuts and bolts of it is what do you tell kids now that so many states have legalized marijuana? It's something that's happened slowly over the last 20 years or so. Something that was always kind of part of the counterculture has now become normalized. Uh, Um, Kids know there's medical marijuana, so what? And what do you tell them? I've, my experience has been so far is kids are really curious and they have great questions. I did a couple classes recently for some junior high and high school kids in a Hamilton County school, and the presentation I did for them, we talked a lot about the adolescent brain, like their brain. Okay, what's going on? The perception of harm regarding marijuana has clearly gone down. We see that in our local surveys here in the county. but it's true across the country. And for obvious reasons, it's being legalized. It's a medicine, so kids' perception of it has gone down. At the same time, as we've said, today's marijuana, it's high potency, it's a variety of forms, it's a potential for addiction, its potential for harms, both mental and physical, is great, particularly for kids. It's important for them to know that their brain is developing really till they're about 25. Okay, kind of from the back to the front. The part of the front of your brain, the prefrontal cortex that controls decision making, thinking about the future, weighing things out, and all that is really developing last. Explains why kids do a lot of things impulsively,
Yeah.
teenagers, why did I do that? Why did I just do that? Well, there's reasons for it. And what I did is, and I use a toolkit that's there's one I'm using from Stanford University, California, Stanford University Medical School. And it really emphasizes to the kids, okay, this is what happens when you use THC. This is the different parts of your brain that are affected, and that's why these things happen. This is why memory can decline, short-term memory, because it's affecting this brain center. This is why if you come across something and you're stoned and you might get lost looking at a sunset or an ant on a flower or something. Here's what's happening in your brain. Here's what's going on. They appreciate that, just being told the facts, and then we talk about the potential for addiction, the dangers of the high THC products, the data showing increases of psychotic episodes that kids have had, developing mental illness, the link between the statistics on suicide, not only on just suicidality, on suicide intention, and becoming addicted at a young age to marijuana. And it is for kids potentially addicting, just like any other substance. So we try and give them the facts and tell them what today's product is like and how it's totally different from what existed in their parents in the 70s. It's a different world, and they really have to be careful and think about it. And that's, in a nutshell, is I think what we talk about. We talk about brain development. We talk about what this drug does, why you shouldn't use it when you're young, and according to like other things like alcohol and other things too, the better you are holding off before having a drink or trying something. If you can get through high school, definitely, and maybe through college without trying stuff, you might never start. The younger you start, the more likely you might develop a problem, an addiction. The more likely you may have an accident, you might have a mental illness issue. Kids are being told it's good, and kids say, especially in college, oh, I use it for anxiety, I use it to help me sleep, I use it for depression, when in fact is that it actually can make those problems worse. And initially there may be some help. Maybe the user might feel like, oh, I'm less anxious, I can cope with school. But the long-term impact of using for kids is it tends to make all those problems worse.
I always appreciated when someone in your position talked to me, I guess you could say as an adult, but just, like you said, just told me the facts, didn't try to make it cringy, and try to talk down, but just say, okay, this is what's happening, this is what we know. And I always felt that was more helpful than trying to almost sugarcoat it.
Yeah. Well, I think we've learned in prevention, we've learned a lot over the years of things that don't work, scare tactics, or the other side is to become all buddy, with the kid and try and become, I'm your friend and everything. It's kids respect, I think, good information that's based on science, and that's what we try and do. And remind them too, it's legal in New York State if you're over 21. If you're under 21, it's against the law to use it, just like alcohol. It's against the law to drive with it. You'll lose your license. You could hurt somebody. It impairs you different than alcohol, but it definitely can impair. If you're behind the wheel and you use, you will be impaired. It's going to affect your judgment in a lot of ways. So, yeah, try and get kids, really the science and what's going on. And also, one of the things too, one of the main messages we get to them, I think that's important to kids is like, this is a time in your life where you're finding out what's important to you. What do you love? Um, that could be a lot of things. When I was in high school, it was basketball. Um, that process of finding out what is important to you and what you love while your brain is still developing, while developing pathways. If what you learn to love is hanging out with your friends and smoking weed and playing video games, well, your brain will develop pathways that are connected to the reward centers that will make it very hard to get out of that, that reality, and the younger you start. So I think that's one thing we tell them, and I think they appreciate that message. And
Now, I want to get back kind of to the dispensaries as an adult, because as you mentioned, you have to be 21 to purchase cannabis in whatever form is available in a dispensary. Do you think that considering what marijuana is, that it's hard to say it's safe. You can't say it's safe. Just like alcohol isn't safe, it's just something to do. But would getting marijuana from a dispensary be safer than getting it off the street? I mean, that's how I always felt. Is
yeah, well, there's a lot of arguments for having a legalized, regulated tax market for cannabis. One is that the products will be tested, from agriculture right up through production. If it's done well, some of the problems other states have had will be minimalized. The presence of pesticides and mold and things like that. But yeah, of course, we had a couple of years ago, we had the lung EVALI crisis where a lot of people were getting sick and dying. We found out most of it was coming from people using vape cartridges, which are cartridges that include an oil with THC in it, which you would put in your e-cigarette and consume, and found out there were ingredients in that it was being made on the black markets that were not what you want to put in your lungs, including vegetable oil, vitamin E, acetate, things like that. So yeah, there's always the danger on the illegal drug market is you don't know what you're getting, and that's true of every substance. One reason we have such a terrible drug poisoning overdose problem in the country right now is because of fentanyl, a very, very potent synthetic opioid, which is finding its way all through the illicit drug market. It's in cocaine, it's in heroin, it's being sold by itself, and it's deadly. It's in fake pills. That's one of the big things we're doing is publicizing the terrible danger of the country. Really is flooded with fake pills that are manufactured, made to look like prescription pills like Oxycontin or Xanax, and it's a huge problem. People are taking them, buying them on the internet, buying them from street dealers, and dying because they have a few grains of fentanyl in them or more. So yeah, that's one of the arguments for having a legalized, regulated market for marijuana is that you can control what's in there, and it will be, I think, in New York State, with the products will be tested and they'll be safe with contaminants, but there's still the issue of it as a drug and whether it is safe. Modest casual use, probably the harms are minimal, but for adults, like anything like alcohol, overuse presents real problems. While using machinery or driving presents real problems. And I think the main thing will happen with these legal markets, not just it's being legalized, it's being commercialized. That means there's a lot of big money, big companies are really heavily investing in this. alcohol companies, multinationals who want to, produce alcoholic beverages with THC. There's a lot of money pushing this whole thing. Um, it's going to be just in New York State, it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar business. So, legalization is one thing. Decriminalization is, I think, for us, would have been a better alternative. But commercialization is going to create a lot of problems, because a lot of people who want to make money off this are going to be pushing the limits wherever they can, as far as advertising, as far as creating new customers, because that's what they want to do. That's how the tobacco industry got so huge, is from the very beginning, they try to create new customers. And one of the best ways is to target young people.
Now, I know this has been weighed on both sides of the debate, is the dispensaries' influence, whether positive, negative, on street marijuana. Because you have some people who claim, like I said, people are gonna go to dispensaries because it's safer in the fact that it's not as contaminated. You know what you're getting. I know I'm not gonna go with the high 99% marijuana. If I'm gonna start out. But then some people have argued that it's gonna be pricey, just like just like cigarettes are pricey, alcohol is pricey. Marijuana is going to be pricey, and that will in fact drive people more to the cheaper markets. Have you heard anything on like any research that kind of back that
Yeah.
up, or?
Well, that's one of the big arguments for having a regulated legal market, is that it will make um, the illegal street illicit market wither away. People are going to prefer to go to the local dispensary and get it. Hasn't happened anywhere else. California's illegal market is probably 5 times the legal market. One reason is that so much, and you probably might be surprised to hear this, so many municipalities and counties in California have opted out. So you have a lot of the sales concentrated in certain areas. Even if they haven't opted out, I think because it's taxed, the end product the price is going to be pretty high. So definitely in California, the Northwest states, Colorado, there's a huge black market which exists. We've seen already in New York State since legalization last year that people believe that it's fine to just continue, that it's not being prosecuted, and it's not much. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in New York State long term. I think the best guess you could say is that the black market will thrive right alongside the legal market. Some people will want to go to the dispensaries and want to go in there and talk to a bud tender and have a lot of stuff to choose from. But in New York State, the taxes right now are likely to be quite high. I mean, it likely be as high as 30% tax. One reason is that New York State they'll be taxing at the retail level, but there's also going to be a second and unique THC potency tax at the production and distribution level. Might be unworkable, but the idea is to tax the higher potency products like concentrates higher than you would for flower. Best guess is that in New York State, the tax levy on cannabis above what it would have be sold if there were no taxes is around 30%. That's a lot. It might be the highest in the country, maybe close to Washington State. So I best guess, and I think especially if New York State doesn't prosecute illegal cannabis very much anymore, you're going to see a thriving black market exist right next to the legal market.
Yeah.
Maybe long term it'll eventually wither away, but I think in the short term, next 5 to 10 years, it will continue to exist and actually grow.
Yeah, and we mentioned earlier when I asked about like how much you can have. I mean, I'm not an expert on the plants, but having 12 plants per family, we'll say, that seems like you could get a lot out of that.
Well, yeah, that's for medical. It'll be less for personal use. But
Mhm.
yeah, if you know what you're doing and can grow, I'm not sure. I can't give you exact answer, Gary, how much a well, a normal mature plant grows. I guess it depends on your skills, but
Right.
I think it's reasonable to assume if you want to start your own little backyard grow and have several plants, you can produce a lot,
Mhm.
and you can give it away. But I think there's a potential there for, and you're not allowed to do that, is to sell it. But there's a huge potential for to have your own little business. So if it's illegal to grow it, it's going to be very hard to control what happens after.
Yeah,
Um,
because like if I have my own, I wouldn't call it a patch. When I have my own patch, yeah, if there's not real, it sounds like there's not much stopping me if my friends came over, hypothetically, and then just like,
right.
yeah, yeah, I've got these 12 plants.
Well, like like you said, there's limits on you can share or give away a certain amount, but there's limits on that quantity too. So, you can't give your friend, say, okay, you want to give me I'm going to trade my motorcycle for here's 2 pounds of my homegrown. You can't do that.
No,
It's
no,
above, there's limits, but
but
it's going to be hard. And I think a lot of it's going to depend how once the businesses get established, how much they see the illegal market to be a threat and how much they will then pressure the state to crack down. And I think that will happen in New York State. I think New York State is going to be a particularly big business. Um, the goals of Albany under the MRTA is to really emphasize, like I said, social equity, minority, women, and small businesses, and try and prevent these big multi-state operators from coming in and gobbling up things. I think it's in the long run, that's going to be a losing battle. I think you see a lot of these companies will, social equity businesses will get established, make money for a few years, and then eventually will cash out and sell to these big companies. And eventually you'll see a real concentration, maybe 10, 20 years from now, but it'll be dominated by big companies. Then eventually you'll see, I think, the Amazonification of the industry. You see home delivery. Um, Even if you opt out, say you live in a town in Hamilton County or Essex County, or wherever it's opted out, you'll still be able to get it through home delivery. I think eventually you'll see more vertical integration and big companies take over the business and push the little guys out. But it'll be interesting. New York State is what they've done is really pretty unique. Other companies have social equity goals, but then if you look at who actually is running the cannabis industry, it's basically rich white men.
yeah, I'm sorry I giggled there because when you say home delivery, all I could think about is a drone, one of those Amazon drones with a package of marijuana just
Sure.
on my doorstep. Like, there you go. And then there it goes.
There's a lot of, the business is attracting a lot of real smart, ambitious, knowledgeable people at every occupation you could think of. It's fascinating to listen on some of these cannabis conferences, and it's a lot of very, it's not a bunch of stoners and hippies. It's serious, educated people who are driving this business forward. And yeah, sky's the limit. And I think it's going to be really hard as it gets normalized. I think in a lot of ways we're playing catch up because so much is not known, because so much research has not been done on cannabis, partly because of the illegality at the federal level, that we're playing catch up, as the business and the states legalized what's known about the health effects. We're really behind the curve on that, just as we're behind the curve on dealing with the impaired driving issue.
Yeah, it seems like to me that they kind of put, I guess you could say, the cart before the horse, because what it sounds like is like, here it's legal, but now we gotta backtrack and make all these rules when it should have been the other way around. Like, let's get this all hammered out, and then introduce it.
Yeah.
At least that's what it looks like to me. It feels like we did it backwards.
Yeah, I think you're right, Gary. I think that's a great point. I agree. You've seen in states like Colorado, they've tried to rectify some of the mistakes they made. They passed some legislation recently on potency levels, which were totally unregulated. So that's good. I think in some ways, New York State is trying to learn from the mistakes in the past. I think Albany is sincere about trying to, through warning signs, packaging, labels, very strict limit on advertising, and they are, at least so far, are trying to minimize the harms. That I hear PSAs and see billboards that are paid for, by Albany, by the Office of Cannabis Management, talking about some of the issues I talked about of the if you go to their website on the developing teen brain, the adolescent brain, and why kids shouldn't use. So they're saying some of the right things for sure. So I guess you have to give them some credit for that. And I think they are trying to do things differently and learn from some of the mistakes that were made in other states that have legalized, particularly California and Colorado. So I think just to kind of get toward concluding, I think we'll see retail at some, probably in urban markets by the end of this year. So that will be, when that happens, that will be, in the headlines. And but I think a lot of problems will result from it as use will go up. And we'll have to deal with, for there's going to be more addiction, there's going to be more mental health issues, more visits to emergency rooms from kids consuming edibles that they shouldn't have. All the things that have happened in other states, I think, will inevitably happen here. So that will be part of our work going forward.
Mhm. And like you said, I think that's a good place to end the interview. If you think we've missed something, make sure to check back on our original interview done about a year ago on marijuana, and because we delve more at that point into the plant itself than this, where we're kind of going through the laws and regulations that are coming up. I want to thank you again, Pat, for coming on out and doing this with me. I always enjoy talking with you about these type of things, and helping try to get the information out there.
Great. Well, thank you, Gary. DACLAN Radio is a great station, and I always enjoy talking to you. Let me give a final shout out or plug to our coalition's website, for riversofhamiltoncounty.com, and also our Facebook, Instagram, and our new YouTube channel, hashtag Four Rivers Alliance. Check those out. We have more information on this and other related topics, including on our YouTube channel. We're doing a lot on health, wellness, and mindfulness for kids. And I will stop that with that plug.
All right, and then I want to add to that plug a little bit. You'll also be at the farmers market in Speculator, correct?
Yeah, Four Rivers Alliance will be tabling at the Speculator Farmers Market this summer on most Thursdays, and we will probably be other places around the county as well. Of course, our office is located at the Four Corners in Speculator, 2896 New York 8, right in beautiful downtown Speculator. I'm looking out my window right now at the rain.
Yes.
So if you're here and want to stop in, I'm here. My colleague Lori is here also. And we have lots of literature, but hopefully we'll see you at the farmers market this summer.
Yeah, Laura Lee is I've talked to her a bunch, and she's definitely great to talk about, just like you are, about this sort of subject.
Sounds very good, Gary. Thank you so much. It's been fun.
All right, thank you, and we will see you all next time here on Heart to Heart with Gary Rhinehart. And I hope everyone takes care.